My name is Kaitlyn McConnell, and I am here tonight with David Scrivner, a fiddler who has participated in the Missouri Folk Arts Program's Traditional Arts Apprenticeship Program, both as an apprentice and a master artist. David is going to share more about these experiences, which span from 2001, when he began as an apprentice with Douglas County fiddler Bob Holt, and goes to 2024, when he mentored Coy Stephan. Thank you for being here with us today.
Glad to do it.
So, kind of to kick things off, can you kind of give us the backstory on how you decided to learn more about Ozark dance fiddling?
Well, I started playing music in general because my dad kind of insisted on it. And so that got me through elementary school, basically. And then in middle school, I met Bob through some friends from school. And I would say that I fell in love first with the people in the old-time Ozarks dance community. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that actually the music made more sense to me. I was trying to play bluegrass before that, and there was all the emphasis on ad-libbing and kind of showing off when you're taking your turn, and I never felt comfortable doing that, and I never felt like that wasn't my gifting. And then I realized that old-time music kind of is more, for my mind, more structured, focused on the melody and the rhythm, and making it danceable for the dancers. And I understood that. And so that plus the community of people is what made me think I might be able to do this, and I want to do this. So.
Well, in 2001 was when you started your apprenticeship with Bob Holt. How old would have you been then?
That's the year I graduated from high school.
Okay. So had you been fiddling how many years before then?
I say that I started in 1997. I think that's the year that I attended the Bethel fiddle camp in Bethel, Missouri, and that's where I met Bob. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where everything started. I played it a little bit before that, but just a little bit.
So we were kind of going off script here for a second, but I didn't realize Bob and you were a county apart, but it was at Bethel where you actually met?
Yeah, it was through Bethel because, so the girl that I met him through was my classmate in high school. Mm-hmm. Her mom was my choir and drama teacher also. My mom was a teacher, so, everybody knew everybody. And Erica is a classical violinist, and her mom told my mom that she was playing fiddle as a side thing, and that she was going to go to this fiddle camp in Bethel.
Wow.
And that's how my dad found out that she had started taking lessons from Bob, and my dad, having grown up in Ava, knew all about Bob, that he was a big deal, and insisted that I had to meet him and learn to take lessons from him. The interesting thing is that I had been swayed by other people who weren't into old time into thinking that old time was like this lesser thing, and that bluegrass was the true music, and that's what I should be playing. So actually initially I did not want to play old time music. I didn't want to know Bob. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. But I was sort of initially forced into it. But then, like I said, I got to know the people and started actually understanding the difference between the two types of music, and yeah.
Well, kind of segueing off of that, kind of talk about the apprenticeship with Bob. What would you say was the most important thing you learned as a tap apprentice with him back in 2001?
Yeah, so when I was taking lessons from Bob, because I took lessons from him before I did the tap apprenticeship, I guess that got me up to where I was at a level where he and the people at the Folk Arts thought I was ready to do an apprenticeship. And so he always was trying to emphasize the rhythm and the bowing. And he would always say, he would record a tune for me, and I would go home and work on it for a week, and then I'd come back to his house the next week and play it for him, and he would always say, and I think I've heard other students of his say this, and we all hated it, he would say, well, you've got the melody, or you've got the notes, which meant you don't have the tune, because there's a lot more to it. And those were the things that he was always trying to emphasize. And I think as a student, I see this in other people, and I know it was true for me, you get so focused on the notes and the melody that you forget there's other things to listen to even. And so by the time we got ready for the apprenticeship, then that was sort of the thing that Bob and I both knew I needed to emphasize. And so we were going to do it in the context of Ozarks dance fiddling. And should I stop?
No, makes a cameo appearance.
Yeah, I knew she would do that. She'd probably try to lay on my lap. Anyway, I mean, Bob was known as a dance fiddler. And if you were going to learn from him, it just made sense to do that. And I know Bob cared a lot about passing on the Ozarks tunes and way of playing. And there's kind of no better way to do that than to work on dance fiddling. And that's what we focused on. I honestly remember it as focusing on bowing because it was so important. And I was doing it, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of trying to make it through a tune. And Bob really took a lot of time. Bowing is the hardest thing to explain, I think.
I was gonna say, like, if you could explain it to people listening to this, like, what is there an easy way to kind of explain what you mean by that?
In my mind, and I think this is kind of what Bob was going for, you need all the notes, not just the main beats of the tune, but all the notes for a dance tune for dancers who are jig dancing, which is what the old Ozarks dancers did while they were square dancing. You need all the notes to work for what the jig dancers are trying to do with their feet. And in my mind, the way to make that happen is to make your bowing kind of mimic what they're trying to do with their feet. And so he emphasized that you always want to start with a strong down bow because there's a lot of force in that. And so that means you need to end your phrases with up bows so you're ready for those down bows. But then the phrasing that he would use, and that's what I've adopted because I don't know any other way to say it, but he'd say you got to cut it, which means change the direction of your bow. You need to cut every note, pretty much. Not exactly, but pretty much. And that creates the rhythm with your bow that is the rhythm that the dancers need. That's the way I've come to understand it.
How long into this with him did it take you to really kind of get what he was talking about? Or did it vary, like, from...
It was not, I don't remember it as being quick, but we're talking a long time ago.
Yeah.
So my memory...
25 years,
25 years. My memory of the timeline might not be exactly accurate, but I do know that I put a lot of time into it, because I think we did 40 hours of lessons. I can't remember exactly how many hours we were going to do, but I remember we had a number that we had to get done according to Bob. And so we had to do that, but then, I had to do the practicing. And I think doing the apprenticeship, I don't know if I fully understood what the apprenticeship was, but in my mind that meant, people are watching, you got to get it right. And so I always took lessons with Bob seriously, but then I really took it seriously when I got to the apprenticeship. And I remember sitting in my room for hours just trying to figure out what tune can I play for a dance, because we were still learning tunes, but we weren't focusing on learning more tunes as much. It was like the tunes that we were working on were to just give me an opportunity to practice what we were actually trying to do with the bowing. And I remember sitting in my room working through tunes and trying to, I remember getting to a point where I thought I could kind of hear what Bob was doing with his bowing for the first time. And then I remember trying to figure out which tune I could actually make that happen on. And I ended up doing what I know Bob did to all of his tunes, but especially his dance tunes. And I took a tune that I already knew, which was Soldier's Joy, and I just reworked the notes that I was trying to play to make the bowing work. And I know Bob did that on all of his tunes, but especially his dance tunes, because he had a very specific list of tunes that were acceptable in his mind to play, and I guess in the dancers that he was trying to please, in their minds, to play for dances. And so Soldier's Joy was the one that clicked, and I remember thinking, I can feel this now, and I'm pretty sure I'm getting this. And of course Bob was never one to lavish praise on his students. So I don't remember going to his house. I didn't. I was probably really excited. And I went to his house hoping for some kind of praise, and I probably got something middle of the road as far as, like, it wasn't a criticism, at least, you know. Yeah, so that's what I remember about the process. And then it became learning to apply it to other tunes. And yeah. And of course, the whole time Bob insisted that I needed to be dancing, so I would go to his regular dances to try and capture what it was that I was trying to, you know, work towards as far as helping the dancers.
You really thought you needed to understand that side of it to be able to complement what you were doing.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would say was particularly challenging about the apprenticeship?
In my mind, this is not really challenging, but it was an added factor, and it's just the notion we were recording everything with the intention of turning it over also, or providing copies, and that was an additional pressure. Like, I wanted people to, if they ever listened to my apprenticeship tapes, to appreciate them. And incidentally, I think I've shared those tapes with a couple other fiddlers since then, just as a way for them to kind of hear what I went through, and they could try to mimic it in their own process. So, yeah.
Well, you know, kind of off of that, obviously you learned a lot about fiddling and the fundamentals and those sorts of things, but what did you learn about teaching during your time as an apprentice with Bob Holt?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question, and I would like to modify it a little bit. And I would say, what did I learn about teaching Ozarks fiddling? Because I think in Bob's mind that was what he was teaching, and so he had a very specific, and I would say holistic approach to it, in that we kept in mind always that other fiddlers had come before us, and that we could learn from them, and that was a huge part of it. And he did a lot to help me increase my Ozarks music library so that I could listen to it. And he was always encouraging me, you have to listen to this. And it's true, because in this day and age, and in that day and age, 20 however many years ago, nobody listens to Ozarks fiddle music. I do, but people don't believe me when I say I listen to dead fiddlers from Missouri. But that's the truth. But nobody else does. So it's kind of a foreign thing, and you have to develop an ear for it if you're gonna really play it and play it right. So that was a big thing, just kind of finding my place, I think, in the tradition of Missouri and Ozarks fiddling. But along with sort of the idea that this is bigger than what we're doing, he also was really purposeful about broadening my understanding of Ozarks history and heritage, and all of his students. And he talked a lot about the fiddlers he learned from. He talked about the dances that he would play at. And he would always have music parties at his house frequently. I remember we would always have one in October, because I think his birthday was in October, Erica's birthday was in October, and then this other fiddler who was our age, whose name was Travis Bentley, his birthday was in October. And so we would always have a fiddle party where we would eat junk food and play fiddle tunes until late into the night. And so, like, he introduced me through that to the, I guess, the house party tradition, which is a big deal, and that's community. And of course, the McClurk Jam. But also, I know that, like, Erica grew up in town, and so I think in his mind she was a city girl, and he wanted to share, like, country life with her. So he would still go hunting, you know, and so he would have squirrel or whatever, and he would have her come to the lesson early to try, like, squirrel and dumplings. I remember I was always jealous that Bob was spending more time with her or whatever, but I think he knew that I was a farm boy and that I probably had eaten squirrel, and so he really focused on sharing things like that with people that weren't exposed to it. And I know he got a big kick out of it, but also I think in his mind it's all part of being in the Ozarks and from the Ozarks and playing the music of the Ozarks. It's all a holistic thing that goes together. And So I've tried to do the same thing with Coy as much as possible. I mean, we didn't eat squirrel or anything, but he's a farm boy, so he knows all of that stuff. But I did really try to expose him to the tradition and increase his music library. And I insisted that he needed to be listening to all of this music as much as possible to develop an ear for it. And I tried to connect him with what I know of the history of the tunes and who played them and things like that.
You know, thinking about like the music that Bob had you listen to, you know, we talk about like the legacy recordings that Max Hunter did, and were those the types of recordings you were listening to, or was it Bob had recorded recordings and you listened to those?
No, it was like people like Lonnie Robertson, who was from Gainesville. That was a big one. And then also talking about, there was a family, the Jones family. It was three brothers, also from Ozark County. H.K. Sylvie, but then more broadly outside of the Ozarks, he was very insistent that I needed to listen to Cyril Stinnett, who was from farther north in Missouri, and Lyman Inlow, and even Bob Walters, who is older than them, and Casey Jones. Like, that's reaching pretty far back in the Missouri tradition. And we talked about Art Galbraith, and the funny thing about Bob, I've told this story before, it may be documented, it may not. I asked him about Art Galbraith because I had heard about Art, and I didn't have any recordings of Art. And Bob summed it up in this really interesting way, because, you know, Art played a little bit slower. It was really pretty. We played fast and with lots of drive. And so I asked about Art. His response was, well, now, you know, Art, he's a city fiddler, but we're country fiddlers. And that was supposed to sum it all up.
So no squirrel for him.
No squirrel for him, I guess, yeah.
Are those the same types of musicians that you had Coy listen to, or have they
Yes.
changed over time?
Yes, that's basically the list of what I told him. The thing that I also tried to tell him, which was not available when I was learning, was Gordon McCann's collection online through Missouri State. And I said, you need to be looking on YouTube and you need to search that collection. And I gave him a list of fiddlers that he needed to find in that collection and listen to. And of course, Bob was at the top of the list on that. Because even I learned from Gordon's recordings of Bob tunes that I never heard him play, or maybe I remember him playing once in a while, but he never taught them to me. And so I really wanted Coy to be exposed to that as well. I mean, the difference was I had Gordon giving me little tapes here and there, like, you need to learn this tune before his collection was available. So I still have those tapes too.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
Let's see. Tell us a little bit more about the apprenticeship when you taught Coy Stephan this year. What would you say was the most important thing you taught him in tap, which I assume starts
we just kind of talked about that.
The tapes, but what's the second most important thing?
Well, I mean, like, just the technique. I really copied a lot of what I remember and what I now understand Bob was trying to do in my apprenticeship. We focused on bowing a lot. And the funny thing is, you know, Coy's parents were there and they were always like, David, you've really improved Coy's intonation and his sound. And I was like, we didn't work on that at all. We worked on bowing. But really, Bob was right. Bowing is everything. And I think Coy, I don't want to try to speak for him, but I know he's commented on the bowing really helped him and gave him, like, just a framework. You know, that's really kind of what it is. And I've heard fiddlers from, like, even just from Arkansas, they would say, I learned a tune from them and then play it, and they're like, you've already put the Missouri bowing on it. And I didn't even know I was doing it, but that's just what you become as a fiddler, you know, a lot of times is like, that's your framework that you fit things into. So anyway, I think that was the most important thing in my mind to pass on to Coy, was really purposeful bowing. Yeah, and I will say he got it a lot faster and a lot easier than I did, which was humbling.
Maybe you're just a really good teacher.
We can go with that, but I think he's a really good student.
Well, I have a couple of other questions. The last one on the list here is, what does the master artist apprenticeship relationship mean to you, both in and now? And then I've got a couple more ad-libbed, looking forward back questions.
Okay. So the master apprentice relationship, I guess I'll start with what it means to me looking back to working with Bob. And I think that through that, I became known as a Bob Holt student. And people will say, I can hear Bob Holt in your fiddling, which to me is a huge compliment. And I didn't realize, I guess at the time, that was happening even, you know? Yeah, I took lessons from Bob, so, you know, I'm a Bob Holt student. But to hear people say, even now, I can hear it in your fiddling, that's something entirely different, you know? But I would say, so like, I think that's part of what maybe the relationship did for Coy. But I also tried to be maybe more purposeful in just getting to know Coy as a person as well. It wasn't just about fiddling, and it was about just getting to know each other and having that community, which Bob in his own way did, but like exposing Coy to as much of it as I could, and just being there more as a mentor, I guess, in some ways, and not just a master, I guess. Because in my mind, that's part of being a good master for an apprentice, is providing, you know, whatever kind of mentorship is there. Not that, you know, I mean, we were pretty focused on fiddling, but still.
Well, and I mean, so I kind of get the sense that obviously Bob taught a number of people in the region, but you're primarily the only one that's still actively fiddling as much, like more than anybody else at this point, right?
I'd say in the Ozarks, maybe. Mike Fraser still plays quite a bit. And Liz Amos does play, but she lives up in Columbia, so questionable whether that's in the Ozarks or on the edge of the Ozarks. But even she lived out of state for a number of years, so I wouldn't say I'm the only one, but in the Ozarks I seem to be maybe the most active in the old time circles.
Well, and I kind of also get the sense that like we're always in a state of the old time traditional fiddling in the Ozarks is ready to die.
Yeah, we were when I was learning it.
So that's my question: is like, is it as dire as it sounds? Has that changed since you started with Bob? And what was his attitude with this? Was it purely like the preservation? Was he worried about that, or was it more
He was definitely worried about preservation. I know from talking to others like Alvy Dooms, who was his guitar player for decades, and also from recordings that other people have given me from like the 80s. Bob didn't always strictly play old time. I know like early in his life he played in bars in Iowa, and like I'm sure that was honky tonk and country, and like the recordings I have from the 80s, that's pretty bluegrass, like very traditional bluegrass. It's good stuff, but it's not what he became known for. And he made a decision at some point that he was going to start teaching, and he was going to start teaching old time traditional Ozarks fiddling because nobody else was, and he didn't want it to die. And I've heard Alvy talk about that. And Alvy says that he told Bob, "You're crazy. You couldn't be a teacher. You don't have the patience." But he was a good teacher. And I think part of why he was a good teacher, and I would never strive for this in my teaching, but like was because he didn't maybe have that patience. Like he had enough, but I think we all knew we better do it right. Or I don't know what the or was, but like we felt like it was pretty strong.
Do you think, like, did he learn these old time tunes growing up himself, or was that something he taught himself later when he thought it was important
It's
to
both.
preserve it? Okay.
There are definitely at least a handful of tunes that he's on record. People have recorded him saying, "I learned this from the neighbor down the road because my dad wanted me to learn this tune because it was a good dance tune because his dad was a dancer." So yeah, he definitely learned some, but I mean, he played all of his life, and he had a large library of recordings that he learned from, and it wasn't all Ozarks, and it wasn't all Missouri. It was a lot of different, even his dance tunes. a lot of them have pretty strong roots in bluegrass, traditional bluegrass. So yeah, it was both.
Well, and I guess he accomplished his goal in like keeping it alive because you were his student in a way. I mean, you're the one who's kind of seen as the leader of that now. What do you see looking forward? Like, what do we need to be, or do we need to be thinking about how this needs to be more, or is it something that it's run its course and then things?
No, I think honestly, if you'd asked me a year ago, I wouldn't have said this, but I think that the Ozarks is kind of potentially ripe for a revival of sorts. Here's the thing, people want to square dance. And it's really interesting to me. In the last couple of years, I've had more requests for square dances. So we need to focus on that and try to make it happen. It's hard because you need callers and you need a place. Those are the two hardest things. Getting people to come doesn't seem to be the hard thing anymore. It's facilitating it and making it possible. And so we've had a couple, that we've tried to do here in Springfield at the Mother's Brewery tap room. I mean, sometimes with very little advertisement, they were full, and people were having a good time and dancing the whole time. And we've done square dances at the Cherry Blossom Festival on a Tuesday night in Marshfield. Also, that was really full this last year. And it's just, we need people to help facilitate and teach and call. And the problem is a lot of those people died off or aren't able to do it anymore. So that's the real hurt is, we've got to get actual dancers and callers to just make it happen. So that, plus I see an interest in younger students who want to learn to play. I just got done teaching at the fiddle camp, the OMA fiddle camp that's in Mountain View. And it was really interesting to hear students down there talking specifically about Ozarks fiddling and Missouri fiddling versus Arkansas fiddling versus Appalachian fiddling. That requires a little bit of knowledge and interest to just have the conversation. And this year, I don't remember those conversations as much in past years, but this year, it was all the time. People wanted to talk about that. So.
I don't want to make any assumptions. People in general, I think, miss something more when they don't feel like it's around them all the time. What do you think is fueling the revival of the interest? Do you think it's the fact that it's not commonplace, it's not something people hear all the time, it's not taken for granted, or do you think we're just hungering, if for not too corny, but wanting something more authentic, and this fills that role?
Yeah, I think it's a number of factors. I think you're right. It's different. I think also people have started to realize it is dying, and there's a little bit of sentimentality maybe attached with that. But I think an important factor is that there are a few younger people starting to do it, and so it's not just a bunch of old people in their minds, and so that attracts them to it. And I think, I would mention Emily Garut, now Boldman, and her husband Hawken. They're a big force that way, I think. Very good musicians, and they're very, I think, committed to old-time Ozarks fiddling. But then also Coy now, and so then their peers see them doing that, and I think that helps to create interest as well.
And then I guess the last thing I would ask, unless you have anything else you want to add, is going back to the apprenticeship program, and just generally, why do you think is a good thing that we have something like this?
Coy and I did 40 hours in a few months. That's a lot of commitment because he was in his senior year of high school, so that's a busy time period. And I know he put in a lot of time to practice. So all that to say, when you plan an apprenticeship like that and stick to your plan, it's a pretty intense experience. And intense experiences are how you grow and how you learn. And I think it was good for Coy and me, just learning, hey, I can do this thing, I understand it. Maybe I have a place in this community now. So I think that is a benefit, and we always focus on, did you learn the skill? Yes, great. But I think there are a lot of other benefits through the apprenticeship program. And because it was more intense, it's not just like giving lessons and taking lessons. It's much more focused, the way we did it at least, much more focused you're trying to cram it in, you know, focused and intentional. And I think that's really good.
Well, I guess I'm sure it varies from apprentice to master and all the genres, but there's probably an element of the relationship too, that like you're fostering that hopefully that helps things go on.
Well, that's part of the intensity too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Coy and I pretty much stuck to, when we were really in the middle of it, doing something every week. And like, it wasn't just an hour. I would usually go to his house and we would spend all of Saturday morning, and then we would have lunch, and then we would do more in the afternoon. And some days, like, I could tell Coy was too tired and his brain wasn't learning anything anymore. And we would have to just shift into, okay, play what we worked on, you know, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Which it sounds like you're just putting in time, but no, he needed that experience to actually play those tunes too. And I would play guitar for him, you know, so he was actually getting to play them with somebody else. And so yeah, it's really intense. But yeah, it's the relationship, because you're spending that much time together. I mean, we ate lunch every week, or a couple times Coy came down here and we ate dinner together, you know, like, and I was there at his house with him and his family, so it wasn't just Coy. I learned about their farm, their family history, and all of it.
So cool.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you'd like to add about any of this?
Just that the apprenticeship is a very good opportunity. Keep doing them. We need more of them. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.